I first noticed something was wrong when I drove back from town and found a bright orange plastic fence slicing through my woods. At first, I thought it was a mistake, maybe some utility company marking a line. But when I followed the fence deeper into my property, I saw fresh survey flags hammered into the ground. A large sign had been posted too. Future home of Pine Grove Forest Estates. Luxury lots coming soon. My stomach twisted. I knew every inch of these woods. They weren't vacant land. They were mine, passed down through 3 generations of Brooks' blood, sweat, and reverence for the forest. A few days later, a man I'd never met before, Scott Hendricks, showed up at my doorstep. Big smile, firm handshake, and an even firmer tone when he said, "You should move your boundary line before things get complicated." I stared at him, trying to process what I was hearing. Complicated? This land had been ours since before Scott probably learned to tie his shoes. I asked him politely to remove his fence. He laughed an ugly sound and said the land was up for grab because nobody really owns wild woods anymore. That's when I knew. This wasn't a mistake. This wasn't a misunderstanding. Scott Hendricks thought he could steamroll me. He thought I was just another tired ex-ranger living out my days quietly in the woods. He had no idea I held every deed, every conservation easement, and every right to this land, and that I wasn't going anywhere. Ever had someone try to steal what your family built? Share your story, because some battles are too important to walk away from. Before the orange fence, before the threats, before the paperwork and the courtrooms, there was only quiet. My days started with the sunrise over Pine Grove Lake, mist curling like smoke over the water. I'd walk the property line every morning, boots damp from a dew, rifle slung casually over my shoulder more from habit than need. 60 acres of forest, creeks, rock outcrops, and wildflower meadows. Mine, ours, passed down from my grandfather to my father, and now to me. I hadn't always appreciated it. Back when I was young and stubborn, I thought the woods were too slow, too silent. I left Pine Grove as fast as I could, first for college, then for the Forest Service, chasing fires and patrolling parks from Alaska to Arizona. I wore the uniform proudly, but it was always a borrowed pride, someone else's fight. When my father passed away 3 years ago, I came home for the funeral, stood by the old cabin with its sagging roof and moss-covered porch, and realized something deep and old had been calling me back for longer than I wanted to admit. So after 20 years, I came home for good. I spent the first year restoring the cabin by hand. New beams, refinished floors, a stone hearth to replace the one that had crumbled. I planted a vegetable garden beside the kitchen. I built a dock at the far end of the lake where the bass loved to hide under the lily pads. I cleared the old logging trails just enough to make them passable, but not so much that they lost their wildness. I wasn't trying to make the forest bend to me. I was trying to live inside it, like my father did, like his father before him. Neighbors were few and far between in Pine Grove. Most properties were large and posted with no trespassing signs, but there was a kind of unspoken respect among the old families. We didn't meddle. We didn't pry. We nodded across gas station aisles and left each other alone, the way I liked it. The first time I noticed something strange was subtle. Hiking the northern boundary one evening, I found a crushed soda can near the stream. Not unusual. Kids sometimes partied in the woods, but there were boot prints too. Heavy tread, not hiker's boots, construction boots. I brushed it off at first. Maybe just a logger passing through. Maybe nothing. But then came a second time. Tire tracks rutted deep into the eastern meadow, far from any public access road. Then the third, a drone buzzing overhead one morning while I was checking the chicken coop. Not kids, not chance. Someone was watching. Someone was planning. I wasn't naive. Pine Grove was changing. The tourists used to come for the fishing and the hiking. Now they came with briefcases and architects. Developers sniffed around like wolves, buying up old farms and carving them into neat little cul-de-sacs with names like Whispering Pines and Deerfield Heights. They offered cash. They offered promises. They gutted the land and called it progress. But not me, not this land. I turned down offers quietly over the years. No for sale signs. No negotiations. I thought that was enough to keep them away. I was wrong. The first official move came in the mail. A thin, polite-looking envelope from Hendricks Development and Construction. Inside, a letter, formal but cheerful, proposing a partnership opportunity to maximize the utility and profitability of my unused forest parcel. I laughed when I read it, cracked open a beer on the porch, and tossed the letter into the fire pit. I should have known better. I should have seen it for what it was, a warning shot. Because when the letter didn't get a response, Scott Hendricks didn't back off. He moved the war to my doorstep. The orange fence went up overnight. Survey flags pockmarked my woods like tumors. The future home of Pine Grove Forest Estate sign gleamed in the morning sun like a slap in the face. And then Scott Hendricks himself showed up, all cologne and self-assurance, acting like he was doing me a favor, telling me to move my boundary markers, telling me that land didn't belong to me anymore because it was unused and needed revitalization, as if history didn't matter, as if stewardship was weakness, as if a place only had value if you could pave it and sell it by the square foot. I didn't yell, didn't punch him, though God knows I wanted to. I just closed the door in his face. Then I went to the attic, pulled down the old chest where my father kept every deed, every survey map, every conservation easement sign since 1958. I laid them out across the dining table, took out a pen, started making notes, because Scott Hendricks didn't realize who he was dealing with. I wasn't just some ex-ranger living in a cabin. It was a Brooks, and Brookses don't run. Brookses fight, especially when the land, the trees, the water, the memories is at stake. I spent that night wide awake, listening to the crickets, listening to the wind scraping against the cabin walls, listening to the land breathing around me. The land my grandfather had planted with white pines when he came back from Korea. The land my father had walked every Sunday after church, teaching me how to find deer tracks and fox dens. I owed them more than silence. I owed them a fight. When the sun rose, I brewed a pot of coffee so strong it could strip paint, sat down at the kitchen table, opened a blank legal pad, and I wrote 2 words at the top: protect everything. I didn't call anyone that morning. I didn't storm into the county office demanding answers. I just started walking, boots laced tight, notebook in my back pocket, camera slung around my neck. The first place I went was the northern boundary, the place where the orange fence had sliced the deepest into my woods. It wasn't just a fence. It was a message. Someone had run stakes every 20 feet, bright pink tape fluttering from each one. Fresh bulldozer tracks gouged the ground, tearing through wild blueberry patches that had been growing there since I was a boy. And farther along, a portable toilet sat in the middle of the clearing like a promise. This land is no longer yours. It's ours now. I crouched down next to one of the stakes, pulled it up. The ground was soft from last night's rain, and the stake slid free easily. Tied around it was a laminated tag. Lot 17B, Pine Grove Forest Estates. They weren't just speculating. They had already divided up the land, already named it, already sold it, or were planning to. I jammed the stake into my pack. It felt wrong leaving it there, like leaving a knife buried in someone's back. After walking the perimeter, I went into town. Pine Grove wasn't big. 1 main street, 1 diner, 1 courthouse that doubled as the town hall. I parked 2 blocks away, habit from years of being a ranger, staying out of sight when you needed to, and walked in through the front doors like I had every right to be there. Because I did. Inside the courthouse, the clerk's office smelled like dust and copy toner. A big woman named Connie sat behind the counter, glasses perched on her nose, flipping through paperwork like it personally offended her. I waited until she looked up. Need a parcel map and any filings related to Pine Grove Forest Estates, I said. She sighed, the kind of sigh that said she was already having a bad day, and shuffled back into the records room. While she dug around, I studied the community bulletin board by the door. Flyers for lost pets, farmers market announcements, and there, pinned crookedly among them, a glossy postcard. Pine Grove Forest Estates. Luxury living in the heart of nature. Reserve your lot today. There was a mock-up drawing. Dozens of identical brown roof McMansions crammed along winding fake streets with names like Hickory Hollow and Whispering Brook Way. My stomach churned. They wanted to termite woods into this. A copy-paste nightmare. Connie came back, slapping a manila folder onto the counter. "Here's what we got so far," she said. "Applications pending. Nothing finalized yet. Pending." That meant Hendricks hadn't secured everything. Not yet. There was still time. I flipped through the papers. Zoning requests, preliminary plats, contractor agreements. On page 3 I found it. A diagram of the development. Lots 1 through 30 neatly mapped. And 15 of them, 15, lay squarely inside my property lines. Not bordering. Inside. Like they just assumed I didn't exist. I took pictures of everything. Every page. Every signature. Then I thanked Connie and left before the anger boiling in my gut could spill out and get me thrown from the building. The back of the cabin. I spread the photos across my dining table next to the old deeds my father had kept. Parcel 7 mine. Clearly marked on the county survey maps. Recorded with the registrar back in 1964. No subdivisions. No easements given up. Solid. Undeniable. And yet here was Hendricks, carving up my land like a butcher at a meat counter. Why? Why risk it? Why push so hard? I didn't have to wonder long. That night, I drove into town again, parked down the street from Rusty's Tavern, the only real bar in Pine Grove. Construction trucks lined the lot like cattle at a feeding trough. Inside, the place buzzed. Loud voices, country music on the jukebox, the thick smell of beer and fried food. I kept to the shadows, near the back. And there he was, Scott Hendricks, sitting at the bar, throwing back shots, holding court with a group of men in Carhartt jackets and ball caps. Developers, contractors, surveyors, planning my funeral. I edged closer, pretending to study the dartboard on the wall. Their voices drifted over the music. "Already got 3 investors lined up," Scott was saying, loud and proud. "Just need the county to rubber stamp the plats. Then it's smooth sailing." One of the men chuckled. "What about that old ranger, Brooks?" Scott laughed. "Brooks? He doesn't even know what's coming. Place is practically abandoned. No utilities, no infrastructure. The town wants growth. They'll side with us." Another voice piped up. "You sure he can't cause trouble?" Scott leaned in, lowering his voice. "But not enough. He doesn't even have a lawyer. And if he does, well, we'll keep the paperwork moving fast enough he won't know what hit him." I felt something harden in my chest. Not fear. Resolve. They thought I was stupid. They thought I was slow. They thought the woods had made me soft. They had no idea who they were dealing with. I slipped out of the bar before they noticed me. The cold night air slapped my face, clearing my head. On the walk back to my truck, I made a list in my mind. Get legal representation. Gather all documents, deeds, surveys, conservation easements. Document every trespass, every illegal construction. Find allies if possible, local conservation groups, environmental boards. Never let them control the timeline. By the time I reached the cabin, frost was already creeping across the fields. I didn't sleep. I sat at the table under the harsh yellow light, flipping through deed books, making notes, highlighting key passages. The fire in the hearth burned low. The crickets went silent. Even the wind seemed to hold its breath. This wasn't just about a boundary line. This was about a way of life. About whether a man could be erased just because he didn't have deep pockets and loud lawyers. About whether memory, family, land, history meant anything anymore. Scott Hendricks had laid his trap, but he'd forgotten one thing. I wasn't some lonely old hermit. I was a Brooks, and my roots ran deeper than his shallow stakes would ever reach. The next morning, I made 2 phone calls. The first was to Anna Lopez. Anna wasn't just any lawyer. She specialized in land conservation law. I had met her a few years back at a forestry conference when she gave a blisteringly smart talk about easement protections. We'd exchanged numbers, but never had a reason to talk. Until now. The second call was to Ray Benson. Ray had been Pine Grove's county surveyor for 30 years before he retired. If anyone knew the history of boundary lines around here better than my father, it was Ray. Anna answered on the second ring. "Daniel Brooks," she said, her voice sharp but not unfriendly. "Yeah," I said. "I have a situation. Someone's trying to develop part of my land without permission." There was a short pause. "Tell me everything," she said. So I did. From the orange fence to the stolen stakes, to to what I overheard at Rusty's Tavern. Every ugly detail. And it didn't interrupt. When I finished, she said, "Okay, first thing, don't confront them directly. Second, start documenting everything. Photos, videos, timestamps. Anything that proves continuous use and ownership." "I already have the deeds," I said. "Good," she said. "Scan them. Make backups. Physical copies, too. This is going to come down to evidence." Her voice softened just a hair. "And Daniel, don't wait. They're counting on you, hesitating." I promised her I wouldn't. Ray Benson took longer to answer. He finally called back after lunch, sounding groggy, like I had woken him from a nap. "Brooks boy," he said. "That you?" "It's me, Ray," I said. "I need a favor." Ray chuckled. "I'm retired, son. My surveying days are behind me." "This isn't about new surveys," I said. "This is about proving the old ones." That got his attention. I laid it out for him, quick and blunt. By the end, Ray was breathing heavier. "They're messing with the wrong piece of dirt," he said. "I remember when your grandfather fenced that north lot himself. I helped him measure it. Still got the notes somewhere, I think." "You think you could find them?" "For you," he said. "I'll start digging right now." With the calls made, I got to work. First, the perimeter. I walked every inch of my property line again. This time with a GoPro clipped to my jacket and my phone recording timestamp video. Every stake I pulled out of the ground, I filmed. Every construction truck I saw parked even a foot across my property line, I photographed. Every fresh bulldozer track, every broken branch, every scar in the earth documented. I didn't touch their equipment, didn't move a cone or a fence post. Just recorded, impersonal, undeniable. Then I set up the cameras, trail cameras, the kind hunters use, motion-activated, waterproof, nearly invisible once you mounted them to a tree. I placed 6 around the most vulnerable areas, 2 near the north boundary, facing the illegal stakes, 1 by the dock at Pine Grove Lake, 2 along the old service trail where construction trucks had been sneaking in, 1 aimed at the clearing where the luxury sign had been planted. Each camera was password protected. Feeding footage to a secure cloud storage account Anna helped me set up. At night, I sorted through everything I captured. There were already photos piling up. Hendricks surveyors trespassing, hammering in stakes on my land. His workers digging exploratory trenches. Trucks ferrying materials without permits. It wasn't just arrogance. It was coordinated, systematic, predatory. Meanwhile, Anna got busy too. She filed a preliminary notice with the county clerk asserting my ownership of Parcel 7 and placing a hold on any permits involving my land. It wasn't a final stop, but it was enough to slow them down. Enough to make the county ask questions before rubber stamping anything else. Ray called me 2 days later, voice crackling with excitement. "Found it," he said. "Dug it out of the old filing cabinet. Your granddad's survey records. Signed, dated, notarized, the whole 9 yards." My chest tightened. This was better than gold. "Can you drop them off?" I asked. "I'll bring them by tomorrow morning," Ray said. "And Daniel?" "Yeah. You hold onto that land, you hear me? We don't get many places like that left." "I will," I said. I meant it. While I waited, I kept collecting. I went through my father's old photo albums, pulling out every picture that showed the property over the decades. My grandfather planting the pines, my dad building the dock, birthday parties in the meadow, hunting trips in the fall, winter sled races across the frozen creek. Proof of continuous use. Proof of love. Proof that this land wasn't forgotten or abandoned, it was family. One afternoon, while checking the southern boundary, I caught them in the act. A work crew, 3 men in neon vests, dragging survey equipment across my land like they owned it. I stood at the tree line, camera rolling, arms folded across my chest. One of the workers saw me. He nudged the others. They stopped. One called out, "Private property, sir. You can't be here." I laughed. A hard, humorless sound. "You're the ones on private property," I said. "Mine." The color drained from his face. They packed up in a hurry. Didn't even look me in the eye as they bolted for their truck. Good. Let them run. Let them know I was watching. That night, I sent Anna the new videos. She responded immediately. "This is excellent. Keep it coming. Don't interact. Just gather." Still, it wore on me. The constant vigilance. The knot in my stomach that never quite loosened. The fear that if I let my guard down for even a day, they'd slip something through. But every time the fear crept in, I thought about my grandfather. Hands calloused from decades of clearing trails without a single complaint. I thought about my father, teaching me how to track a wounded deer without losing its trail. I thought about the woods themselves, ancient, patient, resilient. I wasn't doing this for myself. I was doing it for them. For every tree that had grown taller under our care. For every fox den hidden deep in the underbrush. For every memory stitched into the soil. By the end of the week, I had built a file thicker than my forearm. Deed, records, conservation easements, surveyor's notes, historical photographs, trail camera footage, eyewitness video, proof so solid even the slickest developer couldn't wriggle past it. And just in time, because a few days later, a crisp white envelope appeared in my mailbox. Certified letter, return address, Pine Grove Development Corporation. Inside, a cease and desist letter, demanding I remove unauthorized obstacles, read my boundary markers, and cease interference with legally sanctioned development activities. Signed smugly by Scott Hendricks himself. I read it once, then I set it down, smiled to myself, because Scott had made a mistake. He had put his arrogance in writing. And now, I had him exactly where I wanted him. I didn't respond to Scott Hendricks' letter. I didn't have to. I had something better, a growing mountain of proof, a lawyer smarter than any developer's bagman, and a hell of a lot more patience than Hendricks had counted on. But he wasn't going to give up quietly. No, men like Scott don't back off when you ignore them. They escalate. They push harder. They try to scare you into moving. And that's exactly what he did. It started 2 days after I received the cease and desist letter. I was walking the ridge trail, checking on the trail cameras, when I heard the low hum of engines. Multiple engines. I crept through the trees, moving slow, boots silent on the damp earth. When I broke through the last line of underbrush, I saw them. 3 bulldozers, idling just outside the eastern boundary. Men in hard hats, clipboard in hand, pacing. Survey flags already staked deeper into my land than before. And right in the middle of them all, Scott Hendricks, standing with his arms crossed, giving orders like he owned the place. I stepped out of the tree line, didn't say a word, just stood there, watching. Scott spotted me almost immediately, his mouth curled into a mockery of a smile. He strode over, boots crunching gravel. "You're trespassing," he said. The irony almost made me laugh. "This is my land," I said calmly. "You're the trespassers." He sneered. Not for long. Counties reviewing the zoning requests. Just a matter of time now. I didn't rise to the bait. Instead, I pulled out my phone, started recording. Scott's smile faltered for a fraction of a second. "You can't film us," one of the workers shouted. "Actually," I said, turning the camera slightly, "I can film anything happening illegally on private property." Scott turned back to his crew, barking orders. "Move it along. Get the perimeter cleared by noon." One of the bulldozers revved its engine, started inching forward, toward my trees, toward 50-year-old white pines my grandfather had planted by hand. I stepped forward, heart hammering. "Stop that machine," I said loud and clear. No one listened. The bulldozer's blade dipped lower, tearing up the first line of undergrowth. Something in me snapped. Not anger. Something colder, harder. I pulled out my phone again and called Anna. She picked up on the second ring. "I need an emergency injunction," I said, voice tight. "They're actively destroying protected property." "Stay calm," Anna said immediately. "Get video. Don't engage. I'll file with the county judge right now." I hung up and filmed everything. Every tree crushed, every flag planted, every shouted order. Proof. Unavoidable, undeniable proof. By nightfall, Anna had filed the paperwork. By the next morning, the county sheriff was knocking on my cabin door. Deputy Monroe, young guy, fresh out of academy, nervous. He handed me a temporary restraining order against Pine Grove Development Corporation, effective immediately. "No work, no entry, no modifications until the hearing," Monroe said, reading from the document. I nodded. "Good," I said. "Just be aware," he added, voice low. "They're pushing back hard. Political pressure." Money. I'm not surprised, I said. He hesitated. If you need backup, not everyone around here thinks what they're doing is right. It wasn't much, but it was something. The next few days were tense. The heavy equipment vanished from my property line, but not the threats. I started getting anonymous letters in my mailbox. You're holding up progress. Selfish old man. Better hope you don't have an accident out there. Cowardly stuff. Meant to rattle me. It didn't. I kept documenting. Kept walking the boundaries every morning, cameras rolling. Kept stacking evidence, like firewood before a storm. Then the vandalism started. First it was my mailbox, bashed in with a baseball bat one night. Then it was a tire on my truck, slashed clean through, left to deflate overnight. Then the warning signs, spray paint across my dock, move or burn. I reported everything to Deputy Monroe. Not that it did much good. Without witnesses, without video, it was just another civil dispute in the sheriff's log. Still, I kept the reports filed. Paper trail. Anna said it mattered, not just for criminal charges later, but for building the picture of harassment. Scott Hendricks wasn't subtle. He started showing up more often, driving slowly past my cabin, lingering at the trailheads. Once, I caught him standing at the edge of the woods, just inside the county road, watching a house. He didn't say anything, just smiled, mocking, daring me to do something. I didn't rise to it, didn't give him the satisfaction. Instead, I recorded the encounter, time-stamped, geotagged, proof, always proof. Through it all, the forest remained steady, the wind through the pines, the ripples across Pine Grove Lake, the herons lifting silently from the water at dusk. The land didn't flinch, so neither did I. Anna filed a motion to fast-track the hearing. Meanwhile, I started reaching out quietly to conservation groups, Friends of Pine Grove Woods, the Land Trust Alliance, even a few sympathetic journalists I knew from my ranger days. Not to create a media circus, not yet, but to make sure if this fight turned ugly, I wouldn't be standing alone. One night, I sat on the porch with a beer in my hand, staring out across the darkened woods. The stars overhead were sharp, glittering endless. I thought about my grandfather, carving this life out of the wilderness. Thought about my father, teaching me that real strength wasn't in your fists. It was in knowing what you stood for. And I realized Scott Hendricks could send all the letters he wanted. He could tear down signs, slash tires, spray threats on my dock. He couldn't touch the thing that mattered most. He couldn't touch my resolve. He couldn't scare me off my own land. The hearing date came faster than I expected. A week later, Anna called me. "Pack your documentation," she said. "We're going to court." Her voice was tight, serious, determined. "I'm ready," I said, and I was more ready than I had ever been in my life. The morning of the hearing, I woke up before the sun. The cabin was still and dark, air heavy with the damp smell of pine and last night's rain. I sat at the kitchen table, sipping black coffee and flipping through the thick folder of documents Anna had helped me organize. Deed history signed and notarized. Survey maps dating back to 1958. Photographs of the property through 3 generations. Videos of the trespassers, the bulldozers, the illegal stakes. Police reports of the vandalism. A paper shield. Proof of everything. At 8 sharp, Anna pulled into the gravel driveway in her battered blue Subaru. She got out, adjusting the strap of her heavy satchel. Her suit perfectly pressed despite the early hour. "You ready?" she asked. I nodded. More ready than I'd ever been. The courthouse wasn't far, just a 15-minute drive into town, but it felt like crossing into enemy territory. I could see Hendricks' crew already gathered outside when we pulled up. Slick suits, shiny briefcases, fake smiles, and 2 white teeth. Scott himself stood in the middle, laughing like he was already celebrating. He caught my eye as we climbed the steps, raised a hand in a mock salute. I didn't return it. I didn't even blink. Inside, the courtroom smelled like old wood polish and nervous sweat. The judge, a stern woman named Mary Culver, took the bench promptly at 9, calling the matter of Brooks versus Pine Grove Development Corporation. The clerk announced. Anna stood, smooth and professional. Across the aisle, Hendricks' lawyer, some imported big city shark named Vance Murdoch, rose too. This wasn't a trial. Not yet. Just a hearing to determine if the restraining order would be made permanent and whether Hendricks' project could be halted pending a full property rights investigation. But it mattered. This was the first real shot fired in open ground, and it opened with quiet force. She laid out the history of the property, the original deeds, the conservation easement signed by my grandfather, guaranteeing the land's protected status, the continuous maintenance and use by the Brooks family for over 60 years. Then she handed the judge a flash drive. Your Honor, this contains time-stamped video evidence of the defendant's trespassing, surveying, and attempting to alter protected land without permission. Judge Culver took it without comment, and it wasn't done. She pulled out a series of blown-up photographs mounted neatly on boards, bulldozers tearing into wild meadows, workers hammering illegal stakes, survey maps submitted to the county showing subdivisions on my parcel without consent. Every image a hammer blow, every document a nail in Hendricks' coffin. When it was Murdoch's turn, he smiled like this was all beneath him. He tried to argue that the land was essentially abandoned, that I had failed to maintain visible boundaries, that the community had an interest in promoting development for economic growth. He waved around vague letters of intent, claimed permits were imminent. But every time he spoke, Anna calmly countered. Continuous documented use, she said. Recorded easements. Illegal trespass documented with video evidence. Murdoch grew redder as the hearing went on. Scott Hendricks fidgeted behind him, his cocky grin fading inch by inch. Finally, Judge Culver leaned back, hands steepled under her chin. The evidence is clear, she said. Mr. Brooks retains sole ownership of Parcel 7. The defendant's actions constitute trespass and unlawful interference with private property. She turned her gaze sharp and cold toward Hendricks' table. I am extending the restraining order permanently until further notice. No development, no alterations, no access to Mr. Brooks' land without express, documented permission. She paused. Violation will be treated as criminal trespass. Murdoch started to open his mouth. She cut him off. Further attempts to claim rights over Parcel 7 without new material evidence will be considered frivolous litigation, subject to sanctions. Gavel down. Hearing over. Outside, the air smelled sweeter, fresher. I breathed deep. Anna packed up her files with a satisfied snap. First blood goes to us, she said. I smiled for the first time in days. It wasn't over, not by a long shot, but we'd landed a heavy blow. Scott Hendricks caught up with us in the parking lot. His face was tight, jaw clenched so hard I thought he might crack a molar. You think you won, old man? He hissed. Anna stepped forward, cool as ice. Your client would be wise to reconsider further harassment, she said. Mr. Brooks is now protected by court order. Any violation will result in criminal charges. Scott laughed, short, bitter. You're killing progress, he spat. Killing this town. I looked him straight in the eye. This town was fine before you got here, I said. And it'll still be fine after you're gone. He didn't answer. He just turned and stalked back to his Mercedes, slamming the door so hard the entire car shuddered. The next few weeks were a strange kind of quiet. No more bulldozers at the property line. No more surveyors tromping through the underbrush. Even the late-night harassment died down, though I still kept my cameras rolling, just in case. And it kept busy too. She filed complaints with the county's code enforcement office, petitioned the zoning board to revoke Hendricks' pending applications based on fraud and trespass, reached out to the Pine Grove Conservation Society to formally document my land's protected status. It wasn't glamorous work. It was slow, grinding, paper-heavy warfare. But it mattered. Every document filed, every letter sent, every official notified. Meanwhile, I went back to walking the boundaries every morning, checking the cameras, logging any new disturbances. There weren't many now. Hendricks' army had pulled back, licking its wounds. But I knew better than to relax. Predators don't give up just because they lose one hunt. They circle. They wait. They look for weakness. And Hendricks' wounded pride, bruised ego, bleeding money was still dangerous. Then came a tip. A call late one night from a block number. At first, I almost didn't answer. But something, instinct, that made me pick up. A woman's voice, low and urgent. You don't know me, she said, but I work in permitting at the county office. I overheard something. Hendricks isn't done. I sat up straighter. What do you mean? They're trying to fast-track a rezoning petition on adjacent parcels, she said, claiming it includes your land again, under a new subdivision name. My blood ran cold. Do you have proof? She hesitated. I can't give you documents. Not yet. But watch for it. It's coming fast. Then she hung up. No name. No number. Just a warning. I stared out the cabin window into the dark woods. Listened to the night sounds. The low rustle of wind through the trees. The distant hoot of an owl. My land was still mine. For now. But the war wasn't over. It was just shifting fronts. And I was ready. More ready than ever. After the call, I barely slept. I sat by the wood stove most of the night, going over everything in my head. If Hendricks was planning a new zoning request, trying to sneak my land back into the paperwork under a new name, he wasn't just desperate. He was dangerous, and I needed to know. At first light, I called her. She picked up on the first ring. What's wrong? She asked, voice sharp. I told her everything. The call, the warning, the new rezoning attempt. She didn't curse, didn't shout. She just said, okay, then we need to move faster. The first thing Anna did was file a formal notice of property interest with the county zoning board. It wasn't just a letter. It was a full legal packet. Ownership history, conservation easements, maps, court orders. It stated clearly, in language no bureaucrat could miss. Parcel 7 is off limits. Any attempt to rezone or develop it will result in immediate litigation. She also requested public access to all current rezoning applications, a legal right under the state's sunshine laws. They had to show us what they were doing. No more backroom deals. No more surprise votes. Meanwhile, I decided it was time to stop playing defense. It was time to shine a light on what was happening. The people of Pine Grove needed to know what was being done to their town, to their history, behind closed doors. I called an old friend, Mark Rivers. Mark ran a small but scrappy local newspaper, the Pine Grove Gazette. He wasn't fancy. No Pulitzer Prizes hanging on his wall. But he cared. He listened as I laid it all out. The trespassing, the forged permits, the bulldozers, the vandalism, the new secret rezoning. Mark whistled low. Hell of a story, he said. You sure you want to go public? I thought about it. The attention, the backlash, the ugliness it would invite. Then I thought about my grandfather's hands planting seedlings in rocky soil. I thought about the fox kits I'd seen last spring, tumbling through the meadow. I thought about my father's voice, steady and certain, telling me, some things are worth standing for even when it's hard. I'm sure, I said. Mark didn't waste time. He sent a reporter out that afternoon. 2 days later, the headline blared across the front page. Developer accused of land grab and vandalism in protected forest. There was a photo of me standing by the crushed blueberry patch, trail camera footage, still images underneath it, and a long, detailed article outlining everything we had uncovered. They didn't pull punches. They named names. Scott Hendricks, Pine Grove Development Corporation, the county zoning officers who had accidentally lost protest letters. And they asked hard questions. Why were protected lands even being considered for development? How had illegal work been allowed to proceed for months? Who in local government was looking the other way? The town exploded. Not literally, but Pine Grove wasn't used to scandal. Within hours, the Gazette article was posted online, shared across Facebook groups, emailed out by conservation activists. People started showing up at zoning board meetings, angry, vocal, demanding answers. I heard from neighbors I hadn't spoken to in years. Farmers worried about their fields. Retirees furious about losing green space. Young families scared that corporate bulldozers were swallowing everything they loved. Hendricks tried to fight back. He bought full-page ads in the Gazette. Progress for Pine Grove. Responsible development. Economic growth means jobs. But it rang hollow, especially when people started asking, why was the progress being built on stolen land? Why did the responsible development involve bulldozing conservation easements? How many jobs would a bunch of overpriced vacation homes really create? Then came the protests. Small at first. Just a few dozen people gathering outside the county courthouse with handmade signs. Save Pine Grove's forests. No trespassing means NO. Stop Hendricks. Then bigger. hundreds of people showing up at town meetings, petitions flying around demanding a full audit of Pine Grove development applications, local conservation groups filing formal complaints with the state environmental agency. Hendricks had stirred up a hornet's nest, and this time he was the one running scared. The final blow came from an unlikely place. Deputy Monroe showed up at my cabin one evening, hat in hand. He looked uncomfortable. "I probably shouldn't be telling you this," he said, "but you deserve to know." He handed me a sealed envelope. Inside, an internal report, confidential, from the sheriff's office, documenting an investigation into vandalism, intimidation, and bribery, all tied back to Pine Grove Development Corporation. Anonymous witnesses had come forward. Survey workers who didn't like being asked to accidentally tear down private property lines. Clerks pressured to lose inconvenient paperwork. Even one zoning official who admitted Hendricks had offered him a consulting position once the project broke ground. I sat there, reading the report by the flickering light of the wood stove, feeling something deep inside me start to shift. This wasn't just about my land anymore. This was about corruption, about people who thought they could buy and bully their way through anything, and about a town that had finally decided to stand up. The next town hall meeting was standing room only. I got there early, slipped into a seat near the back. Didn't want the show, didn't need the spotlight, just wanted to watch. Scott Hendricks was there too, sitting stiffly at the front, flanked by his lawyers. When the meeting opened for public comment, people lined up, and for 2 hours straight they unloaded accusations, demands for resignations, calls for criminal charges. No one spoke for Hendricks, not a single voice. Even the zoning officials looked like they wanted to crawl under their desks. When it was over, Hendricks didn't wait. He got up and walked out, head down, ignoring the cameras flashing, the questions shouted at him. I watched him go. No triumph in my heart, no gloating, just a deep, steady satisfaction. A sense that, for once, the right side hadn't been steamrolled. We'd stood our ground, and we were still standing. That night, walking back to my truck under the clear, sharp stars, I felt something loosen in my chest. Not the fight, that wasn't over, but the fear, the loneliness, the sense that maybe, just maybe, one man could make a difference. I knew better now. One man can, especially when he's not alone, especially when truth and proof are on his side. And deep in the woods, under the towering white pines, the land waited, patient, enduring, still mine, still free. The dust didn't settle immediately after the town meeting. There were still newspaper articles flying back and forth, still shouting matches in the diner and whispered arguments in the grocery store, still zoning board officials scrambling to cover their tracks. But something fundamental had shifted. The people of Pine Grove weren't asleep anymore. They were awake, and they were angry. I could have stepped back, could have retreated to my cabin, back to my woods, let the town handle its own reckoning. But that would have been a mistake. The fight wasn't just about stopping Hendricks anymore. It was about making sure this never happened again. It was about building something better, something lasting, out of the mess he'd made. Anna was the one who suggested the first move. We were sitting on my porch one evening, watching the sun sink over the lake, when she said, "You need to go beyond defense now, Daniel. You need to propose something real, something people can believe in." I nodded slowly. I knew what she meant. Fighting to keep the land was one thing, but offering a vision for how to protect it, for how it could belong to the community in spirit, if not in title, that was real leadership. That was how you changed the story. We started small. First, I drafted a proposal for a land conservation trust. Parcel 7, my 60 acres, would remain privately owned, but governed under a permanent conservation easement with strict rules about development, deforestation, and public access. Parts of the forest, the meadow trails, the North Lake Dock, could be opened seasonally to the community under supervised conditions. Educational programs for local schools, limited public fishing days, catch and release only, hiking access on designated trails. It wasn't about turning the woods into a park. It was about honoring the land, keeping it wild, keeping it sacred, but letting people touch that wildness in small, careful ways. Anna helped me polish the language. She also helped me draft a charter for the proposed Friends of Pine Grove Forest, a nonprofit to manage public events, conservation projects, and educational outreach. I wasn't naive. I knew it would be work. Managing access, maintaining trails, enforcing rules. But it was better than fighting alone. It was building allies, building a future. We presented the plan at the next town hall. This time, I didn't sit at the back. I stood at the podium, papers in my hands, heart hammering against my ribs. Public speaking wasn't my strength. I'd rather wrestle a black bear than talk into a microphone. But this mattered too much. So I cleared my throat and said, "My name is Daniel Brooks. My family has lived on Parcel 7 since 1953. We have cared for it, not for profit, not for fame, but because we believe some places are meant to stay wild." I paused, scanning the faces in the crowd. Some skeptical, some hopeful, some simply curious. I went on, "I'm not here to sell anything. I'm here to offer a promise. This land will not be bulldozed. It will not be paved. It will not be turned into another cluster of mansions with plastic lawns." I outlined the Conservation Trust, the community programs, the access points, and I ended with this. I fought to protect this land because it's part of who I am, but it's also part of who we all are. Pine Grove isn't just a place. It's a way of life. And if we lose it, piece by piece, tree by tree, we'll never get it back. Silence hung in the room, not hostile, not dismissive. The heavy, breathing silence of people thinking. When the applause came, it wasn't a thunderclap. It was slow, scattered at first, then growing, filling the old hall with a rumble of something deeper than noise. Agreement, commitment, hope. In the weeks that followed, the momentum built. People volunteered for the Friends of Pine Grove Forest. Local businesses pledged donations for trail maintenance and educational materials. School teachers reached out about bringing classes out for nature walks. The zoning board, battered by scandal, fast-tracked approval for the conservation easement. Even the Pine Grove Gazette ran a follow-up story. From land grab to land trust. How one man helped save our forests. Scott Hendricks? He tried to hang on for a while. Filed a lawsuit against me for interference with economic opportunity. But Anna shredded it in court before it ever reached a jury. Without his land grabs, without his political favors, Hendricks' empire crumbled. His company defaulted on loans. His contractors pulled out. His investors sued. Last I heard, he left town under the cover of darkness, leaving nothing behind but unpaid bills and a rusting bulldozer at the county impound lot. Good riddance. Life didn't magically return to normal after that. The scars remained. Trust had to be rebuilt. Processes had to be reformed. Pine Grove had to relearn how to stand on its own 2 feet. But it was happening, slowly, steadily. And not just because of me, because of all of us. The town, the woods, the stubborn, ordinary people who decided enough was enough. One crisp fall morning, I stood at the edge of the meadow, watching a group of third graders tromp down the new trail, giggling and pointing at squirrel nests and deer tracks. A teacher caught my eye and waved. I waved back, smiling. This, not lawsuits, not town meetings, not headlines. This was why the fight had mattered. The woods were alive, and they were staying that way. I still lived in the cabin, still walked the boundaries every morning, still kept the cameras rolling, just in case. But there was a new sign at the old trailhead now. Hand-carved, simple. Pine Grove Forest, protected forever. And underneath it, smaller. Private land, community stewardship, respect the wild. Some nights, sitting by the fire, sipping whiskey while the wind whispered through the pines, I thought about how close we'd come to losing it all. How easily history can be paved over if no one stands up to say, not here, not now, not ever. I thought about my father's quiet strength, my grandfather's calloused hands, the debt I owed to both, and I slept easy, knowing that, for now at least, I had paid it forward. The forest was still there. The lake was still glass smooth in the mornings. The herons still lifted into the mist. The foxes still danced at the edges of the clearing. Life went on. Because sometimes when you stand your ground, you don't just win. You endure. You protect. You rebuild. The first real snowfall came late that year. I woke one morning to find the cabin blanketed in soft, untouched white, the trees heavy with powdered sugar frosting, the lake rimmed in delicate glass. The world looked clean again, new. I pulled on my boots, shrugged into my old canvas coat, and stepped outside. The cold bit through the layers, but I didn't mind. I breathed deep, filling my lungs with the sharp, clean air. The kind of air you only got where the trees outnumbered people by 1,000 to 1. Somewhere deep in the woods, a crow called once, sharp and ragged. Otherwise, silence. The kind of silence that wasn't empty. It was full of waiting, full of watching, full of life. I made my usual round along the boundary trails. The signs were still there. Protected forest, private land, respect the wild. Still standing, still respected. There were fresh footprints here and there, boot prints, small ones, where kids from town had come to hike. I smiled at that. The rules were being followed. The trust was being honored. It hadn't been easy. There had been slip-ups, a couple of teenagers lighting an illegal campfire last summer, a dirt biker trying to cut a new trail. But the community dealt with it. We held monthly stewardship meetings now. Local families volunteered to monitor the trails. The Pine Grove High School Environmental Club had adopted the East Meadow for invasive species clearing. Little things, steady things. The kind of work that didn't make headlines but made a place stronger year after year. I crossed a frozen creek by the old footbridge, boots crunching on the thin layer of ice. Up on the ridge, the bench my father built still stood. I sat down, brushing snow off the seat. From here, you could see the whole sweep of Parcel 7. The lake, now a silver, I half closed with ice. The meadows browned and slumbering under their snowy quilt. The thick pines standing guard like ancient sentinels. Nothing flashy, nothing fancy, but alive. Still here, still ours. I thought back to the first time I walked these woods after coming home. How small I'd felt, how heavy the silence had seemed. Back then, I thought the fight was just about survival, keeping the bulldozers away. But I understood better now. The fight was about belonging, about responsibility, about standing in a place and saying, I will not let this be lost. Not on my watch. My phone buzzed in my pocket. I pulled it out, squinting at the screen. A text from Anna. New grant approved for the Friends of Pine Grove Forest. Trail maintenance and educational programs fully funded through next year. Congratulations, Daniel. I chuckled softly. I hadn't done this alone. Anna, Mark at the Gazette, Ray the old surveyor, Deputy Monroe, the kids clearing trails. It had taken all of us. And that was how it should be. Land doesn't belong to a single person. Not really. It belongs to memory, to history, to the future. I stood, brushing snow from my jeans, and started back toward the cabin. The wind picked up, rattling the bare oak branches. Somewhere nearby, I heard the soft crack of ice shifting on the lake. The world moving, breathing, stretching under its white blanket. Alive, always alive. At the cabin, I set a fire in the wood stove, the dry oak catching quickly, throwing golden light across the worn floorboards. I made a pot of coffee, black and strong, just the way my father liked it. Sat at the kitchen table, steam curling from a mug, and pulled out an old photo album. Inside, snapshots of a life. My grandfather, beaming, holding up a massive trout at the lake's edge. My father, younger than I ever remembered him, hammering the first post of the north fence. Me, 6 years old, grinning gap-toothed, holding a baby fox in mittened hands. A lineage, a story written in dirt and bark and river stones. I closed the album and sat quietly, listening to the fire crackle. No fanfare, no applause, just peace, earned, not given. Later that afternoon, I took the old rowboat, the one my father had built, down to the lake. The ice wasn't thick enough yet to walk on safely, but along the shore it was solid. I pulled the boat up onto the bank, checked the lines, made sure everything was ready for spring. Another season would come, another battle maybe, but for now, the woods were at rest. And so was I. As the sun dipped low, painting the snow in shades of amber and violet, I walked back up the path, each step crunching loud and sure in the gathering quiet. At the cabin door, I paused, turned back, looked once more at the trees, the hills, the lake. Still here, still wild, still free. Because we fought. because we stayed. Because sometimes the simple act of not leaving, of not giving up, changes everything. Inside, I lit the oil lamp on the windowsill. Its warm glow spilled out across the snow, a small, steady light against the deepening dark. A signal, a promise. The forest would endure. The land would remember. And so would I. Always.